With the launch of the new X870 boards, I thought there is no better time than now to build a brand new all-white gaming PC. In the past, I've had all-white PCs, but there were always one or two parts that just didn't fit. But thanks to Gigabyte, AMD, Wootware, and XPG, this one will finally be all white. So at the heart of this build is the brand new Gigabyte X870 Aorus Elite Wi-Fi 7 in the Ice colorway, which is really the reason why this build will be all white for the first time ever. The X870 Aorus Elite has an AM5 socket that supports multiple different AMD CPUs, so you don't need the latest and greatest 9th gen CPU unless you of course really want to. This year though, the generational leap between the X670 and the X870 isn't a lot, with the biggest difference being PCIe lanes and I/O. This means more and faster USB ports, additional M.2 slots with PCIe 5.0 speeds, faster onboard Wi-Fi and LAN, the ability to use faster M.2 expander cards without sacrificing performance, and a few more. This board does also come with Wi-Fi 7 and Bluetooth, which can be used by plugging in the Wi-Fi dongle in the slot at the side of the motherboard. You also have 4 M.2 ports, with 3 of them being Gen 5 and 1 being Gen 4, which is great if you're looking to add a lot of storage to your system, but don't necessarily want to go for standard mechanical drives or 2.5-inch SSDs. One thing I really love about this board is the fact that they place the extra M.2 slots between the top PCIe lane and the bottom two, because with graphics cards getting thicker and thicker, they used to just block the other PCIe lanes, making it impossible to add extra expansion cards, which can be annoying, especially if you are a content creator or streamer and you are using those for capture cards or whatever else you may be using those for. In terms of I/O, we have 10 USB Type-A ports, with some being USB 3.2 Gen 2, while others are USB 2. And then you also have 2 USB 4 Type-C ports, which are always handy. At the top, you have your Wi-Fi 7 port, and then at the bottom, you also have your 2.5 gigabit per second Ethernet port, plus a bunch of audio jacks at the bottom as well. Now for this build, XPG and Wootware were kind enough to send over 4 16GB DDR5 RAM sticks to fill all 4 DDR5 DIMMs, and the ones they provided are 6000 megatransfers per second XPG Lancer RGB in white to really match the all-white build. And honestly, these memory sticks look really nice. The RGB is really nicely diffused without any hotspots, so if you are looking for good reliable RAM that looks good as well, then this is a really solid choice. Now I have to add here that with DDR5, it is actually better to run dual memory instead of filling all 4 slots, as you will lose that max speed when running all 4 RAM sticks. So for me, and my suggestion is to rather run dual memory and remember to switch on your XMP profile. The brains behind this unit for now is the Ryzen 5 7600X 6-core CPU, which I borrowed for this build just to get the initial build done. And I am just currently still waiting for the 9th gen CPU to arrive. So when that does, I will probably do a shorter sort of refresher video, and then also do a deeper dive into performance in game, as well as some other creative tasks when it is actually finally done. Now to cool the CPU, I'm using the Gigabyte WindForce 360mm AIO cooler, which is the same one I used on both of my previous builds, and it worked really nicely. I love the interlocking fans, and in general, it just keeps any CPU you might run really cool. And for something like this Ryzen 5, it might be slightly overkill, but I would rather get a 360mm AIO and know that my CPU is cool compared to having it run hot and potentially sort of reducing the performance of that CPU. And then for storage, I am running a bunch of different M.2 SSDs with a 250GB for a boot drive, a 2TB for most of my games, and 2 500GB drives for some file storage. And then lastly, the muscle at the front end is the Gigabyte RTX4060 Ti Aero, which just looks amazing in this build. The silver backplate matches the silver on the motherboard perfectly. The white matches up with the rest as well. And overall, it is just a really great addition. And even though this isn't the thickest GPU on the market, there is still a ton of space below it to fit all of your other sort of capture cards, for example, if you wanted to use that for streaming or just capturing content or capturing camera, which in the past has been a problem on some of my builds, especially when I was still streaming a lot, with some of the GPUs just sort of blocking the slot where the capture card should go in. Now, a PC for me has always had to be multifunctional, as I don't just use my PC for gaming, but for a lot of other tasks as well. And for that, this PC has been amazing. I've been using it for the last couple of days to watch videos, do research, type videos, and even edit some content. And for all of those, it has been able to run through all of those tasks really easily. The sheer amount of RAM at 64 gigabytes really made doing creative tasks a breeze. And even though I'm never really gonna need 64 gigabytes for gaming, it is nice to know that I have that ceiling for creative work, which is always nice to have. Now we'll do some tests to see the impact on the performance with the slower speeds of the RAM, but I will do that in either a short or in the next video just to sort of see how it actually impacts having the slower RAM speed compared to having just less RAM but running at a much faster speed. But then where it really gets fun and where a lot of you probably want answers is on how it performs in games. And for the most part, the setup runs most games in 2K and even some in 4K while still performing really decently. Now it does tend to fall apart with a lot of titles in 4K and with some newer titles in 2K, but I did test games like CS2, Star Wars Outlaws, and even Prince of Persia, and all of them ran really well, but it did take some tweaking in Star Wars to get the best settings to have it run smoothly in 2K. For me though, I love how this build turned out. The motherboard looks amazing. The RAM for me fits in perfectly with both the white look and the RGB diffusion. The GPU finally matches up with my motherboard, as well as, most importantly, it runs all of my games, at least that I love to play, and it is good enough for all of my creative work, from video editing to some graphic design and sort of everything in between. Now, if you wanted to play games at 2K or even 4K more reliably, or if you just have more intense 3D modeling to do, then I would highly suggest upgrading the CPU and the GPU to something like the Ryzen 7 perhaps, and then of course the GPU to something like a RTX4070 Ti or Super, as those have performed really well in 2K and 4K gaming when I tested them last year. For me, you don't always have to have the best parts, but as long as you have the parts that you need and then buy the best of that, then that is the most important thing. A lot of people buy GPUs or CPUs that are way overspec'd for what they need that PC to do, whether that is just play Fortnite or whatever game that it is that you are playing. Make sure that you aren't overspending unnecessarily and just rather getting the parts that you actually really need. Now this build for me is really solid and all of the components really are good quality. They look good and overall they just match the white aesthetic perfectly. But what do you think of this build? What would you change? And then what do you use your PC for the most? Let me know down in the comment section below, and then as always, until next time, cheers.